If you're renting or you think back to the time that you were renting, you might be able to recall dealing with a rental disaster. Now, what I mean by rental disaster, maybe the blocked plumbing, and for some strange reason you couldn't seem to get too much done about it. The landlord from hell can probably relate to that, or perhaps a really lazy real estate agent that just won't do anything, including when things like your plumbing are blocked. But according to a recent study, there are some areas that are worse than others. Here in West Australia, it's Shelley. Don'tRentMe.com is a website. We're joined at the moment by Anthony Ziebell. Hi, Anthony.
Hi.
Thinking back to the times when we rented, and for those who still rent, everyone can relate to the recalcitrant real estate agent who for some reason doesn't seem to want to pass on the fact that something is not working in the house, or somehow wants to turn it around and blame the tenant. Or indeed there's a landlord that, despite the fact that something clearly is broken down, it's clearly the landlord's responsibility, they're not going to do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, unfortunately, the agent is a man in the middle, and if they don't get back to the landlord, or the landlord isn't listening to them, there's a big communication breakdown there, and the person who pays for it at the end is the tenant.
How do you overcome this? Because I'll tell you how most tenants feel, and understandably so. If I complain too much, if I whinge and groan to the agent or the landlord, somebody's going to secretly make my life hell, or they're going to find trivial things to breach me, they're going to throw me out of the house, and they're going to blacklist me.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that is really what happens. It's absolutely correct. That is a big part of reviews we get as well, is people are saying that they've asked for things to be repaired, and as a result, they were evicted. There's no real easy way to do it, and I guess that's part of the problem. Unfortunately, as it stands today, whether it be agents or landlords, who's at fault depends on the review, I guess. But, they're not always interested in fixing these problems, and they'd probably rather get rid of a tenant that complains than fix them.
What can tenants do? Because what you're telling me and the picture you're painting right now says, hopeless situation, grin and bear it.
Yeah, well, sometimes it can appear hopeless. The reason why it's hopeless is because there is no transparency. You might find out just through a friend that they had a bad experience with an agent or a landlord, but that doesn't really mean much. The reach is limited. What you can do, and the reason why we created this site, is that together, by reviewing our experiences, we're exposing those negative experiences, and then we can actually find those reviews on the website before we sign a lease. It's
a bit like a TripAdvisor for renters.
Yeah, exactly, TripAdvisor for renters. And you know what, it's one of those things where before we choose to stay in a hotel for a night, the majority of us will actually check reviews on the hotel from a various number of sites, and that's for one night out of a week or a year. When you're signing a lease, you're signing up for 12 months at a time or more, and there's nothing at the moment that would otherwise allow you to check what experience others have had except for our site.
Realistically, what can people do about real estate agents who are a bit recalcitrant? I mean, you've mentioned in one of the suburbs that you've mentioned here in West Australia is Shelley. Now, I could imagine if somebody got a nice rental in Shelley, that would be a pretty desirable area to be. It's not as though it's an area that nobody wants to go anyway. It's an area that if somebody could rent a place at a reasonable price and the house was a reasonable house, they'd be pretty happy in Shelley, I would imagine.
You would think so, but unfortunately it really comes down to supply and demand. In lovely suburbs, you have the problem where people or agents realise that there's lots of other people lining up to get in. So do they need to worry about your complaint? Do they need to fix it? Probably not. And that's what we find.
Apart from obviously deciding to say, well, listen, these are dodgy agents, don't rent with them, if you're looking for a house and that's the only one available, then maybe not going for these dodgy agents, or maybe the fact that this person who owns the house is not a nice landlord, or whatever the case may be, to a large extent it might become a moot point, Andrew. What do people do? The obvious thing, as far as I'm concerned, is the best thing is to get yourself in the position where you can own your own property and you don't have to rent, because then you don't have to worry about landlords and real estate agents and some property manager who decides she's the other Nazi and all the rest of it.
Well, I guess the thing is it could be a moot point, and if it was just the odd person using the site and sharing information, it would. By getting together, what we're doing is we're rewarding good landlords and the good agents, and we're punishing, I guess, the bad agents and landlords. People have made significant investments in purchasing these properties, and it's people's jobs to be a property manager. If they're being exposed as being poor operators, the market can punish them for that, and I think that's going to enforce some kind of a change.
If we have a look at a site like, for example, Don'tRentMe.com, in an ideal world, what you're doing is hoping you'll create the situation where the bad agents, the bad landlords, they'll be left only with the bad tenants. The good tenants will have gone through sites like this. They'll have found a good property to rent through good agents or a good landlord or a combination of both. They'll be in their property. They'll be happy. Obviously, the landlords will be happy. They're getting their rent every week or fortnight or whatever the case may be. They've got tenants who are looking after the property. Meantime, those people who are not particularly good operators are left with the garbage anyway.
That's the system sorting itself out, right? I mean, that's a perfect scenario, and I guess if we help achieve that, that would be fantastic.
Listen, just talking about property managers, I heard a case which I found really interesting of a person who washed their coffee cup. They had a property inspection, and they left their coffee cup on the sink, and the property manager tried to breach them for that. Now, that strikes me as being the ultimate in pettiness. What, if any, certificates or registration are property managers required to have before they can practice as a property manager?
The usual course actually only goes over 2 days, so unfortunately you've got people who are pretty much in control of other people's lives, which is a big thing, and it's a big responsibility. And you've got someone that can go and do a 2-day course and they're qualified. Would they understand all of the laws? I would imagine not. The law around real estate rentals and tenants is enormous.
Well, I would have thought they'd have to have a pretty good understanding of the Residential Tenancies Act in the case of West Australia, so they knew exactly what they were dealing with. What you're telling me, well, 2 days, unless you happen to be a really fast learner, I find it really hard to imagine that you would have a strong and intimate view.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's part of why we have big problems. You know, a lot of the agents, it's just an in-between job as a property manager. These people don't really understand all the laws, and they think they can just lie to tenants. And a majority of the time that seems to work. And that's something we're trying to change through awareness.
It does if we go back to the initial argument that if you brace them up and say, well, hang on a second, you know that's not actually true, then all you're doing is creating a scenario whereby they make your life a misery so you leave, or they find petty things and they breach you until you leave, and then you ultimately end up with a black mark against your name. The other issue that is a real bugbear for many tenants, they vacate a property that they have looked after. They've done a really good job of looking after, and all of a sudden they start getting, well, okay, you won't get your bond back because of this on the carpet and that on the carpet. And by anyone's reckoning, you're talking about fair wear and tear. But once again, do you not come back to this issue whereby people are not usually prepared to argue, because if they do, they once again might find themselves on some sort of tenant's blacklist?
Funny you say that. That's actually what happened to me, and that's why I created the website. My problem was the landlord wasn't doing repairs throughout the period of time that I rented, which is okay, I can deal with that. However, when I finally vacated, even after looking after the property, they tried to sting me for what I thought were really unfair claims on my bond. People can't spend the time to argue it, and not only that, is it really worth your time getting a black mark against your name? And I just thought, well, what's really unfair here is that no one else now knows that this is what they've got to deal with if they come and rent from this agent. I guess the thing is, it's possible, despite every effort, you don't make a change, but if you make no effort, you're guaranteed of no change, and that's why you have to make the effort.
So it's all about hoping you can bring about some change. Now, up to this point, what sort of response have you had to your website? And I guess the kind of stuff we've been talking about are the kind of issues that people bring up as the major problems facing tenants.
There's one more really major one, which is actually around mould. Seems to be a really big issue.
Mould?
Yeah, and black mould, for instance, which is a health issue, seems to be a prominent issue that just seems to feature in almost every review, along with bond issues. They pretty much go hand in hand. A lot of the reviews actually have a combination of bond claim issues, no repairs, mould issues, things like that. And a lot of landlords paint over it, so when you go and inspect it, you have no idea that there's actually an underlying mould issue to deal with. So the beauty of it is that we've had over 500,000 people use our site so far to screen properties before they rent them, and we've had over 1,000 people so far, and the site is relatively new, and we've had over 1,000 people actually review, and I feel as though the more we have awareness of the existence of the site, the more power, or the more empowered people will actually feel, and the more likely they are to actually share that experience, which will just create a revolving door of helpfulness.
And I take it when people view this stuff online, people, for example, would not be able to see who the original author was. So people basically aren't incriminating themselves, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they're not incriminating themselves, so they can use a pseudonym, which is fine. And as long as they abide by the terms of the site, we'll uphold it. So The main thing is they shouldn't actually identify the individual's name, so they can identify the agency, the address, the problems they had, and that's all helpful information to a would-be tenant. They just can't call out who the actual landlord is by name, only because that's not really helpful anyway, and it's also not fair, because otherwise, what if the landlord didn't realise these issues were happening and now he's been defamed?
Indeed, and of course there are the issues of defamation, which can get rather nasty, and one does not want to find oneself on the receiving end of what the legal profession refer to as a precedent. Been a pleasure. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Anthony Ziebell is from don'trentme.com, so if you want to write a review, if you want to check out a property, that could be a good place to start. It's all one word, don'trentme.com.